A side, B side, what side are you on?
Hey, welcome back to A Side, B Side podcast. I'm Brooke. That's Adam. What's up, Adam?
So much, but I'm super happy to be here.
There was like a serious pause there. I was almost worried about you for a second because you're never speechless.
No, I'm never speechless, but I'm excited about tonight's episode. I've been thinking about it all day, and because I don't remember the details of many things like names or schedules or what time things begin, I was rushing to get home so I could be on time, and I had myself convinced that I was starting off today, even though last week I complained about having to start off. So I was all mentally ready to go, and so now I'm kind of readjusting, and it feels so nice to be able to just let you go first.
Well, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has joined on and taken a listen. It's nice to have you. Thank you. Also for you, Adam. So last week you talked a little bit about Eric Stoltz being in Back to the Future. In case you missed that, that's episode 10. Mm-hmm. That's the A side of episode 10. So I thought you'd find this really interesting. I was listening to a podcast this week called Movie Battle. It's hosted by Kevin Armstrong, and he takes two movies and kind of pits them head to head in a battle. And actually, I think we're going to be guests on there. Details on that to come. But it was really cool. This episode was just a little bit different because he had two stars from the original Karate Kid movie on. He had Jeffrey Bryan, who is now also in the band Survivor, and Israel Urabe. You'll probably remember Israel. He was the kid when Daniel first moved into the apartment that like helped him with the bicycle, and he's in the beach scene and all that. Do you remember that?
Yes. It's been a bit since I saw the original, but I've seen it a lot.
Well, last week you talked about two actors. You talked about Eric Stoltz and Crispin Glover. They were those guys from that. So here's a little bit of information you might not have known. Eric Stoltz actually auditioned for the role of Daniel LaRusso in The Karate Kid.
That would have been very different.
It would have been a completely different movie. I don't know that I would have liked it. I don't think it would have been as huge as it was. I don't know. I mean, there was just something about baby-faced, fresh-faced Ralph Macchio in that role.
Yeah, and I think like I have to look back at like the timeline, but Eric Stoltz had been in Mask before he did Back to the Future, but I don't know if he was in Some Kind of Wonderful before they would have done Karate Kid. And Some Kind of Wonderful was such it was perfect for you. Like it was a great role for him. It's a great movie. It's one of my like top 10 teen movies ever. But I don't know if it would have hit as well if he was like the thing that made Some Kind of Wonderful work with his character is that he was guy, but it was a mechanic. It was more like he was the least dynamic of the characters from a outgoing perspective. And both like Ralph Macchio in Karate Kid and Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future, like they are trying to be extroverts. And I never saw like Eric Stoltz as a character that would work as someone who was trying to be an extrovert. But maybe it's because I never got to see him do that.
Maybe. But here's another interesting fact. So you talked about Crispin Glover last week as well.
Yes.
And Crispin Glover actually was up for the role of Johnny, of course, the main bad boy.
Yeah.
In Karate Kid.
Really?
So I thought, yeah.
That would have been super weird.
That, I was like, yeah. But I heard that and I was like, oh man, I've got to make sure to tell Adam that.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a nice little update for your A side last week.
Absolutely. And I think we may have the beginnings of an entire other episode, as I am wont to say, because there seems to be this narrative that Eric Stoltz was like up for a lot of movies that he didn't get, and all kind of within the same genre. And the guy that experienced that in the last like 10 to 15 years was Henry Cavill, who, of course, we now know him as he plays Superman. He's The Witcher, which is so great. Like I literally sing that song when I'm walking and running and people look at me weird, but they don't toss a coin to me either. So I'm a little annoyed, but he was up for like, he was rumored to be up for Batman and Fantastic Four and Captain America, and he was always this runner-up until he got the role of Superman. I think at one point he was even like in consideration to replace Daniel Craig as 007. I mean, like he was always the guy who like just missed out. And everyone's like, this guy's going to be a huge star. We just have to find the right role for him. And he just kept missing it, which kind of is similar or analogous. I don't think that's a word, but comparable to Eric Stoltz in the 80s as well. So that's an entire episode I should probably do some research on.
All right. So you're mostly moved in. I hear Lorelai. Hello, Lorelai in the background.
Yeah, she's running
How was your
around.
week?
It was good. It's good. I'm trying to get the house ready and cleaned to be sold. So that is a lot of cleaning and organizing and purging. I'm still working the entire time, so that's been really weird. And then the dog and I have been really enjoying the new space and going on lots of walks. And we have a balcony, and she likes to go and sit on the balcony and look at all the cars and the people walking by. There were some guys on the roof next door yesterday, and she was very concerned as to why there were humans on top of the building. The only time she's barked in the entire week we've been here is when some neighbors were out on their balcony, and she was like, I'd like to come visit you, but you are far away, so I'm going to yell at you until you figure out a way to come visit me. So other than that, she's been really, really adaptable, and she is a strong, independent wilderness dog. And as long as she's sleeping inside and I remember to feed her and give her attention, like right now, she's like, you should give me more attention. She's very, very happy. So I am lucky.
Well, good. We posted last week, some photos of Lorelai on our Instagram page, and we actually had some people reach out wanting to know a little bit more about her because she looked similar to their dog. And you said she's a what now?
She's a mutt like me. But what I've been told is, and where she was found was in eastern Kentucky. She was running along the side of a freeway. She had chewed off a leash. About a foot of leash was still on her. She was just carrying it with her. What we think was she was left outside, probably not really paid attention to. And she said, you know what? F this. I'm going to chew off my leash and go for an adventure. But she looks very much like a Carolina dog, which is one of the last packs of wild dogs in the U.S. They are found in the Appalachian Mountains in eastern Kentucky, eastern Tennessee, western Virginia, and western Carolina. And they're just a pack of wild dogs, and they kind of do their own thing, and they move around, and they survive, and they find food, and they, just kind of don't have any domestic traits. But they seem to be, not wolves. So they're like dog wolves.
All right. So this week, I'm going to get started, and we're going to start here in just a second.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever thought to yourself, man, I sure would like to make a podcast. I've got so much to say about blank. Well, if you haven't heard about Anchor, you really should. It is the easiest way to make a podcast, and it's absolutely free. All right, I'm going to tell you why it's so easy. Okay, so with Anchor, there's creation tools that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many others. And you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Trust me, I'm so excited about this. You can be too. Download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor FM to get started.
All right. So I guess it is my week to start. I know you love that.
I do.
I know, Adam, you love your old school TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you're kind of like in the whole dating world right now. Did you ever want to go on The Dating Game when you saw it? The old school, like 70s Jim Lang version.
I mean, I have never wanted to go on it, but I have experienced it on small scales. Like if anyone's ever heard of speed dating, it's like The Dating Game, but like for 5 minutes at a restaurant while someone is ringing a bell and making you move from table to table. And that was terrifying. So I don't think I'd want to do that under the hot lights of a television studio.
Okay. Well, if you actually had, you probably may have competed against this guy.
Oh, boy.
When I tell you it's a wild one this week, it is wild. Now, typically, you know, Adam, my thing is I like to find stories that I've never heard before, or maybe I've only heard in passing and I don't know the full details. This one I heard, but it was just so intriguing to me. I had to revisit it and research it myself. This is the story of Rodney Alcala. Now, I've heard people pronounce it Alcala, but when I looked up the proper pronunciation, it's Alcala. So here we go.
I mean, as one of my favorite characters says, I've heard it both ways.
Right. So Rodney James Alcala was born Rodrigo James Alcala Borquar on August 23rd of 1943. Rodney had a bit of a rough start in life. In 1951, Rodney's father moved the family to Mexico, and then he left. He left the family 3 years later when Rodney was around 8 years old.
So he moves them to Mexico and then pieces out.
Yeah, he's like, all right, I'm out. It's been real. Deuces.
Enjoy Mexico.
So in 1954, Rodney's mother moved Rodney and his two younger sisters to Los Angeles. We're going to fast forward a couple of years to 1961. At the age of 17, Rodney joined the Army and served as a clerk. 3 years later, in 1964, Rodney suffered a nervous breakdown and went AWOL, which if you are not familiar with the military, I was Army, AWOL means absent without leave. That just means you didn't get permission, you left, they don't know where you are, or they might even know where you are, but you did not receive the proper permission, you did not fill out the proper paperwork, and you just kind of up and left.
And
so Rodney went AWOL. Yes, there is going to be consequences. So during that time that he went AWOL, Rodney made it back to his mom's house from Fort Bragg. And in the meantime, he was diagnosed with an antisocial personality disorder by a military psychiatrist, and he was discharged on medical grounds, which meant he wasn't facing serious charges, which you can face charges if you go AWOL from the military. But because he was discharged with a medical, it kind of made all that, go away. So after leaving the military, he attended California State University, and then he transferred to UCLA, where he graduated with a fine arts degree in 1968. So far, sounds like not a terrible dude, not great. He's got some issues, right?
Yeah, some stuff has happened, but he clearly is still functioning as a member of society.
Well, after leaving California, for reasons that we will discuss in just a moment, Rodney then enrolled at NYU and studied film, where he took a film class under Roman Polanski.
Wow.
Yes, that Roman Polanski. He was enrolled under the name John Berger. And again, we'll get into that. So Rodney's first known crime, was in 1968. According to LA Weekly, at the time of the attack, a little girl named Talia lived with her mother and her father, who was a music industry executive at the historic Chateau Marmont, because they had recently had a fire at their house, and it destroyed their home. So they were staying at the hotel while things were being fixed. Talia, like a lot of kids, didn't really like to take the school bus. So she would get up early in the morning and she would walk to school. Now, remember, this is 1968. I know you're probably thinking, walk to school? That's crazy. What? No. Maybe you didn't walk to school, but, things were just a lot different. You played outside differently. It was just a different attitude. And that wasn't even in the 60s. So things were a little bit.
I was lucky enough that I lived within audio distance of my school. So I could literally hear the first bell and sprint to my high school and get into my first class, because my friends would be waiting for me by the side door, which was not supposed to be open, but they would open for me so I could slide in. So I would not be late. That's how lucky I was. Also, some really good friends who looked out for me.
Those are some real good friends.
I sprinted because I was running late.
But those are some very good friends. Just a different. It was just
some
a
of them helped me move
time.
this week, so still good friends.
Oh, great! That's nice. So, on the morning of the attack, which was September 25th of 1969, I think I said 68 earlier. I apologize. It was in 69. Talia was on her way to school when Rodney stopped her on Sunset Boulevard and asked her if she wanted a ride. She said, look, I can't talk to strangers. And he said, I know your family. And eventually he was very persuasive and he was able to entice her into the car. Later, when testifying about the incident, Talia said she didn't really remember what happened after that point. She said, I remember being shown a picture, and that was the last thing that I can remember, fortunately for her, because it's about to get graphic. Retired LAPD officer Chris Camacho testified that he responded to a 911 call by a concerned Good Samaritan. This Good Samaritan saw something that seemed really suspicious to her, which good for you. If you see something, act on it.
Yeah.
She saw a man picking up a little girl on Sunset Boulevard. So she called that into 911, which even in 1968, just seeing a random dude pick up a little girl, I'm glad that seemed weird. I know we were a lot more free in the 60s, but I'm glad that she saw that and was like, her spidey senses tingled a bit. And she's like, something's not right.
Yeah.
So Camacho, Officer Camacho said that Rodney took Talia to his apartment, which happened to be nearby. When Officer Camacho arrived, initially Rodney wouldn't answer the door, but then Officer Camacho threatened to knock it down. So he opened a side window and he told the officer he was taking a shower and he'd be out in a second. Camacho held true to his promise because Rodney didn't open the door. So he busted it in. He kicked it in.
Hell yeah, he did.
When he did, kudos to him and good for him, because when he did, he found little Talia on the floor, almost dead. She had a large metal bar across her neck. Things get chaotic because he sees Talia and he's trying to get to Talia to rescue her. So there's a lot of chaos going on. And in that chaos of focusing on Talia, he loses sight of Rodney. And Rodney takes that opportunity and vanishes. He slips out the back door. Little Talia had been raped and beaten, and she had been strangled with that metal bar that was across her neck when Officer Camacho found her. After fleeing the scene of Talia's attack, Rodney, like we mentioned earlier, made his way east to New York City, where he enrolled as John Berger at NYU Film School under Roman Polanski. And it's Berger, B-E-R-G-R.
Not like
No, not like cheeseburger. So in 1971, he got a counseling job at a New Hampshire arts camp for children under the name John Berger, like cheeseburger, with a U and not an E. Now, this is all relevant. That's why I'm stressing this.
Yeah. This dude cannot even remember how to spell his made-up names.
No, this was all intentional.
Oh, okay. Three-card money.
So in early 1971, Rodney was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives. A few months later, there's two kids attending the camp, and they noticed a photo, an FBI poster at the post office. Do you remember when you'd go to the post office? Because I feel like we always went to the post office when I was growing up, or even when I was a little older, because now you don't have to go as much because everything's online, but you constantly had to go send packages or envelopes or buy stamps or whatever. And the post office would always have the most wanted, FBI's most wanted on the wall. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I recently went to buy some stamps and I just got them from an ATM because they have a stamp ATM now, which was very weird. But I remember specifically, this is like 3 months ago, I was looking for are there any wanted posters? And there's nothing now. I saw nothing.
Yeah. And that used to be the thing that's where you would see the FBI most wanted posters. But then that's what they did. So two of the kids from this camp recognized him as their counselor. So they told the camp's dean, and Rodney was arrested and he was extradited back to California. Well, by this time, Talia's family had relocated to Mexico and they refused to allow her to testify. And so without her testimony, the court was really unable to convict Rodney of rape and attempted murder. So they were forced to permit him to plead to a lesser charge of assault. And he was sentenced to 34 months, but paroled after 17 in 1974 under the, quote, indeterminate sentencing program that was popular at the time. So it's the imposition of a sentence of imprisonment without a definite period of time set during the sentencing. So they just say, we're sentencing you to jail, but they don't put a specific time limit on it.
I didn't even know they could do that.
I didn't either. And that may be something they did then and they don't do now, because I don't remember ever hearing of that before. So it basically allowed parole boards to release offenders as soon as they demonstrate evidence of rehabilitation, which we will learn about Rodney. He is a very quick study. Okay. He learns what to say, when to say it, how to say it.
Mm-hmm. He went to movie school.
Exactly.
You understand, like, he was trying to learn how to say the right things at the right time for a script. I mean, that same sort of, talent or skill can be used in other ways.
Yeah. So less than 2 months after his release, Rodney is arrested again for assaulting a 13-year-old girl identified only as Julie J. in court records. She accepted what she thought was going to be a ride to school from Rodney. He was once again paroled after serving 2 years on this indeterminate sentence. So again, he's able to say and do whatever he thinks they want to hear to get him released. So in 1977, Rodney's parole officer, after his second release, allowed him to travel to New York City. Now, mind you, he's been to prison twice, and we already know he likes to flee crimes, but they allowed him to go to New York City. Rodney, now a registered sex offender, got a job in 1978 at the Los Angeles Times as a typesetter. While there, he was actually interviewed by members of the Hillside Strangler Task Force as part of their investigation, because he was a registered sex offender. So they had to include him in that search or in that investigation.
And also they were like, well, maybe this guy, he's strangled people before.
Right. And I mean, that's part of it. That is exactly, it was a sex crime and, Hillside Strangler. So yes, as a registered sex offender who has a history, he was one of the people they interviewed. During his time at the newspaper, Rodney was able to convince hundreds, okay, let me stress this, hundreds of young men and women that he was a professional fashion photographer. And he photographed these young men and women for his portfolio. One anonymous woman who had been photographed by Rodney told an interviewer, she said, "He said he was a professional, so in my mind, I was being a model for him." She was photographed by him in 1979. She said the portfolio included spread after spread of naked teenage boys. Most of the photos in the portfolio were sexually explicit in nature, and most of the subjects to this day still remain unidentified. Oh. So police have suspicions that some of them are cold cases. One victim, 1979, Alcala later testified that he knocked unconscious while she posed for him. That victim was a 15-year-old named Monique Hoyt. Okay, now, earlier you remember I mentioned the dating game, and you're like, how in the world does a dating game come into play here? Yeah. In 1978, Rodney appeared on the dating game as Bachelor number 1. I'm going to have this video, and it's going to be posted on our Instagram and our Facebook. You just have to see this video. So the dating game, if you've never seen it or heard of it, it's kind of similar to modern day Bachelor, I guess you could say, minus the roses, the home trips, and the hookups. Yeah. So Jim Lang, the host, introduced him as a, quote, successful photographer who got his start when his father found him in the darkroom at the age of 13, fully developed. He said, between takes, you might find him skydiving or motorcycling. So when asked by contestant, the Bachelorette, her name was Cheryl Bradshaw, she asked Rodney to describe what kind of meal he'd be, and he responded, "I'm called the banana, and I look really good. Peel me." So Rodney's charm and fun use of innuendo won him the date. However, when they met face to face,
wait, hold on. That worked?
That worked. That's, like I said, I'm going to post the video and you can see for yourself. I mean, you're looking at this from the standpoint of, this is a creepy A dude. This is one damn creepy dude, right? But nobody else on the show knew that.
Yeah, I'm sure his delivery, but it's always
And in the
sad when I hear
70s,
like a line that bad worked.
and you've got to
That's
think in
bad.
the 70s, innuendo like that was, that was fun and
That was bold.
cheeky. So,
Yeah, it was
yeah.
bold, and he
So
skydives
when
and
they met,
rides motorcycles.
So when they met face to face, Cheryl just got really bad vibes from him, and she felt he came across as, quote, really creepy, and she decided not to go out on the date, which, unbeknownst to her, probably saved her life. The fact that she followed her gut. This is more proof. Follow your gut. It's okay to think somebody's creepy. Dude's creepy. It's okay. Be like, dude, you're creepy, and walk away. It's okay. Could save your life. I'm all for following your gut.
Mm-hmm.
So another contestant on The Bachelor described Rodney as, quote, a very strange guy with bizarre options. I don't know what those options are, what that meant, but that's what he said in an interview. So Rodney used his height and good looks to his advantage. And the fact that he was a photographer didn't hurt. He was really intelligent, and he could easily lay on the charm. As we see, he won the dating game.
Right.
In an interview in People magazine, a woman who was supposed to go on a date with Rodney in 1979 but got stood up said he was easy to trust. He had a way of talking to people that really put them at ease. And lucky for her, it's good that she was stood up, because it probably saved her life. And the reason she was stood up was because, well, he'd been arrested.
Dang. So, I mean, Saved by the Bell there in a bit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So we're going to look at some more of Rodney's victims. In the 70s, Rodney killed Cornelia Crilly. She was 23 years old, and Ellen June Hover, also 23, both in New York City. Now, keep that in mind. Now, Cornelia had been raped and strangled with her own stockings in her apartment in June 1971. Ellen was the daughter of a popular nightclub owner, Ciro's Nightclub, and the goddaughter of Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. Ellen disappeared.
He messed with the Rat Pack.
That's where he messed up, okay? So Ellen disappeared on July 15th of 1977, and she left behind a calendar that said that she had a date with John Berger. Her remains were discovered in Westchester County in 1978. On June 20th of 19... Well,
took a while.
Remember, from 77 to 79. It took a little bit for her body to be discovered.
Gosh,
or 78, excuse me. From 77 to 78. But still, that's a while.
Yeah, and the family's like distraught the entire time, and that's just...
There's no closure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So on June 20th of 1979, 12-year-old Robin Samso disappeared somewhere between her ballet class and Huntington Beach, the Huntington Beach area. Her body was found 12 days later, partially decomposed. Robin's friends told police that a stranger had approached them on the beach asking to take their picture. A sketch of the perpetrator was circulated, and Rodney, his parole officer, recognized him immediately. I don't know if this is the same parole officer that allowed him to travel to New York City, but I'm guessing that it is. So police searched Rodney's mother's house, and they found a rental receipt for a storage locker in Seattle. So I Google mapped it, and driving from Huntington Beach to Seattle is 1,171 miles. It would take 17 hours and 10 minutes approximately. So he went to great lengths to hide things.
Yeah, legitimate lengths. That's like a road trip and a half.
Yes. So a search of the locker was done, and it revealed a pair of earrings. They were Robin's earrings. Now, Robin is the 12-year-old that we just talked about that went missing from Huntington Beach. So Rodney was arrested in July of 1979 and held without bail. In 1980, he was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death for Robin's murder. But this is a true crime podcast. That would be too easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not that pretty, wrapped up in a bow that sweet. 4 years later, his conviction was overturned by the California Supreme Court because jurors had been improperly informed about Rodney's past sexual crimes. A second trial in 1986 again ended with Rodney being convicted and sentenced to death. Nope, story's still not over yet. This conviction was nullified by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals due to a technicality. So a witness was allowed to support Rodney's claim that the park ranger who found Robin's body was, quote, hypnotized by police investigators. This happened in 2001.
I'm sorry.
While in
hypnotized?
Mm-hmm. I guess just fascinated by the whole police investigation. So just whatever they said, he would agree with, is basically what Rodney was trying to say.
Wow.
So while in custody and awaiting the third trial, Rodney wrote the book, You the Jury. In the book, he argued his innocence and suggested a different suspect. He also filed 2 lawsuits against the California penal system for a slip and fall that occurred while locked up and for not providing a low-fat diet.
Okay.
So while awaiting the third trial for Robin's death, and with the help of DNA advancements, Rodney's DNA was sampled under a new state law over his objections, of course, because no criminal wants you testing their DNA because why? You're going to find out how many crimes they committed. Right.
Right.
So that sampled DNA matched semen that was left at the rape murder scenes of 2 women in Los Angeles. His DNA matched that of several more cases. Jill Barcombe, 18, in New York runaway that was found, quote, rolled up like a ball in a ravine in LA in 1977. She was originally thought to be a victim of the Hillside Strangler. Georgia Wickstead, who was 27, she was bludgeoned to death in her apartment in Malibu in 1977. Charlotte Lamb, 31, strangled and left in the laundry room of an El Segundo apartment complex in 1988. And Jill Parenteau, she was 21. She was killed in her apartment in Burbank in 1979. Another pair of earrings were found in Rodney's storage locker that had residue that matched Charlotte Lamb's DNA. So he liked to keep souvenirs.
Yeah, well, it's, what they do.
So in 2003, prosecutors entered a motion to join the SAMHSA charges with those of the 4 newly discovered victims. Rodney's attorney contested it, saying, if you're a juror and you hear one murder case, you may be able to have reasonable doubt, but it's very hard to have reasonable doubt on all 5, especially when 4 of the 5 aren't alleged by eyewitnesses, but are proven by DNA matches. Yeah, you think? That's why they're doing it, bozo. So your client can go to prison where he deserves to be.
You can't be prejudiced by facts.
So in 2006, the California Supreme Court ruled in prosecution's favor. The trial began in February of 2010, and he faced all charges. So by this time, Rodney has fired his attorney, and he has decided to act in his own defense. He took the stand in his own defense, and he played the role of both attorney, interrogator, and witness. Okay. And I hate to laugh at this, but this is how ridiculous this guy is. For 5 hours, Adam, he asked himself questions. As the attorney, he would use a deeper voice than usual and address himself as Mr. Acola. And then he would respond in his normal voice.
Like, this is absurd and ridiculous, but it is not out of the bounds of my personality.
You're saying you would do something like this?
Like, if I got to that level of desperation, I might act as my own lawyer and then interview myself. Yeah, I can see myself doing that.
All right. Weirdo.
It's super weird. But also, like, at that point, the guy's like, well, I don't trust anybody but me on any way, shape, or form. So I'm just going to be everyone. And also, it's probably he went to film school. This is his last role he's ever going to get to play. Like, they might do Guys and Dolls in jail, and it's going to get weird. But this is the last time he gets to be on stage. So he just went for it. I could respect that in a weird way.
I think you're way overthinking this. I think he's just a creepy psycho sociopath.
Wait, me overthink things? I don't think that's ever happened.
Oh, then no.
Anyone who knows me knows it's a bald-faced lie.
This dude is just a sociopath who likes attention. That's all there is to that. So it did not impress the jurors. And while Rodney tried to dispute Robin's death, he made no effort to dispute the other 4. How could he? There was DNA evidence. He couldn't dispute it. So during here we get even more interesting. So during his closing arguments, he played Arlo Guthrie's song Alice's Restaurant, in which the protagonist tells a psychiatrist that he wants to, quote, kill. Dude, if you're trying to defend yourself, maybe not play a song talking about how the protagonist wants to kill people after you've killed people. Just
it's a bold choice. This may be where his lack of a law degree came into function.
Probably. Well, after deliberating for less than 2 days, he was convicted on all 5 counts of first-degree murder. A surprise witness during the penalty phase appeared to testify. Talia Shapiro, his first victim. At the end of Talia's testimony, Rodney, again, who's acting as his own attorney, asked Talia if she remembered him. She said no. Then he said, I sincerely regret and apologize for my despicable actions that day. Which I don't buy, because you defended yourself and tried to get out of 5 murder charges. I don't think you really regret it. Right. I think you're just, again, playing. You're so used to playing to the crowd. Yeah. Yes. You think it's going to work for you. And it doesn't. In March of 2010, Rodney was sentenced to death for the very 3rd time. He pled guilty to Ellen June Hover's murder in 2012 and received a sentence of 25 to life, although it will only be served if California releases him from custody, which that ain't gonna happen. At least 2 victims are known to have survived: Talia and Monique Hoyt, the young woman he attacked while taking her photos. Unfortunately, Rodney, that was the one he hit while he was taking her photo. Yeah. Rodney's death toll, his exact death toll, is unknown. Some authorities believe it to be around 50. Others believe it could be as high as 130. In 2010, we talked about his portfolio. In 2010, police shared many more of the thousands of photos that were found in Rodney's storage locker in Seattle. Some people came forward either as the victims or as people who knew the victims. Rodney had charges and convictions in New York, Washington, San Francisco, and Wyoming. One of the photos found was they were able to link Rodney to the 1977 murder of Christine Ruth Thornton. A relative recognized her in the photo. Her body was found in Sweetwater County, Wyoming in 1982, but it wasn't identified until 2015. She was approximately 6 months pregnant at the time of her death. Rodney is currently in California State Prison, Cochran, pending further death penalty appeals. That's the story of Rodney Alcala. Now you're silent. Now you're silent.
Yeah, now I don't know what I think where I mentally broke was when the death toll could be from anywhere from 50 to 150,
130, yeah,
like that 130. Yeah. I mean, that means that there are probably 100 families that have never gotten closure that might have been connected with, and will never get them. And who knows how many other, I don't know what this. There's got to be a statistic or some sort of metric out there, but if somebody's been caught for something, they've definitely done it more than just that time. You don't get caught for every time.
No.
And how many other people were hurt or somebody who counseled on a date? How many other people could have been on that list?
I feel if you're caught the first time, you don't do it again. If you're caught the first time, that's a deterrent. If you're caught the 4th, 5th, 6th time, you're like, well, I got away with it the other times. I'm going to keep going.
Yeah. So we know about 50 to maybe 130, but how many more people were like those ones that were stood up on a date and didn't know how lucky they were? Mm-hmm. Or how many people were on a date and something happened where he didn't get to follow through on his plan?
I personally, looking at these photos of Rodney, back in the day, I mean, I guess I could see how people would find him attractive. I personally don't. I personally wouldn't look at him and go, ooh, he's good looking. But I can see why someone might find him attractive. He's got that very, when you watch old episodes of Three's Company, do you remember the neighbor Larry?
Yeah.
He kind of reminds me of Larry.
Super creepy. Yeah.
Yeah, Larry, he's kind of got that Larry vibe to me. So I can, but Larry always had a girl. Like the women love Larry, but Larry always did come off as a little bit creepy. So I feel like maybe that was Rodney. Like he probably always could get a girl, but there's just something creepy about him.
I don't remember all of the ages, but it definitely seemed like no matter his age, he was preying on people in the younger women
all the way from 18. Well, he started. Talia was a little girl. I can't remember exactly.
Like 12, like 15,
so
that's not even younger women. Those are children. That's not 12, younger women. Those are children.
12 to 30. So I mean, he really didn't. There was no specific age range. If you were a woman, he was going to target you.
Yeah. And if you were a female, because when you're 12, you're a child.
Yeah. But there you go. That is the story of Rodney. That's the B-side.
Okay. So now, with that deep breathing exercise, it's time for the A-side. And we talked a little bit earlier in the start of the podcast where how sometimes I'm super excited not to go first because I put too much stress and want to do everything perfect as the leadoff hitter. But then there's also this thing when I go second is that I can't not have what Brooke just talked about not impact my story. And sometimes that works really well because there's something to connect to. And sometimes it's interestingly disconcerting. So my side today is about one of my favorite stories about an author. And I would like to be a writer. I write things down. I talk a lot. But I've always been fascinated by authors and writers, and especially people that do it very, very well. And so my story tonight is about a time when a very famous writer doubted his own ability, wondered if the only reason that his books were selling is because he'd had success previously, and if that just meant people were going to buy the next book because he had a famous name, and started to write under a pseudonym. And my original thought on this story was how cool it was that it was a mystery that someone who was a very voracious reader discovered. So this is as much the story of Steve Brown, who worked at a bookstore in Washington, D.C. in the 80s, as it is about the author. But also there is a offshoot that I think is interesting that should be talked about at the very end of this. That connects with your story and where stories and how we absorb them can be so very different. So Steve Brown was working at a bookstore in Washington, D.C., and he was a bookophile. Like he loved bibliophile. I don't know. He loved books. I don't know what the word for it is. I think it's bibliophile.
Bibliophile.
Maybe it's bookophile. Yeah.
It's bibliophile.
It's not bookophile because that's not a thing.
No, bibliophile.
But if it becomes a thing, I'm trademarking it. Okay. And he was just a reader of all the books. And he was working in a bookstore, so obviously got some discounts so he could get some more books, was why he worked there. And he bought a book by this new author that he had never heard before. Richard Bachman was the author's name. And he's like, wow, this is a really interesting story. And he started to read the book. And there was something about the book that was way too familiar. Mm-hmm. This was an author that he had never been connected with before, never read before, but he couldn't shake the idea that this author, the way they wrote, the way they crafted their stories, the words they used, was so similar to one of his other favorite authors. So, as Steve Brown is a mystery buff, a literary glutton, he decided to look into more about this author who he had just started to read. He goes to the Library of Congress. Now, granted, Steve is in D.C., so going to the Library of Congress sounds like a big deal, but it's like literally down the street. So like you didn't have to go that far. Mm-hmm. He starts digging into the background of Robert Bachman, and he finds something very interesting in the copyrights that were filed for the Robert Bachman books with the Library of Congress. The copyrights have listed the name of someone that Steve Brown knows is an agent for another author. So this is where it all starts to click. It's the same author that Steve thought was really too familiar. Mm-hmm. Now he's got proof that it's the same agent. So, granted, this is the mid-'80s. Now, it's likely that Steve Brown would go onto Twitter, blast it out, and try to make a name for himself. Back then, he could have gone to the Washington Post, New York Times, any reputable newspaper would have run this story where you potentially have this famous author writing under a pseudonym and not wanting anyone to know about it. So what does Steve Brown do? He doesn't have Twitter, so he doesn't do that, but I don't think he would have. He doesn't reach out to the New York Times or the Washington Post or any other, you could go to a tabloid and probably get paid for it. There was no TMZ at the time, but the Weekly World News would have given him a check. He writes a letter. And again, this is the mid-'80s, so letters were still a thing. He writes a letter to the publicist, who is listed on the documents at the Library of Congress as the copyright holder, and the author that he thinks wrote these books, saying, I feel I have discovered that you are using a pseudonym and you have written these books. What should we do about it?
What should we do?
Yeah, not like the dude is sitting there on a substantial check. You gotta think somebody would give him money for this information. And instead, he writes a letter to those people that have been trying to hide this and asks what they want to do about it. Which I think in itself is a very old-fashioned idea, but speaks to the fact that Steve, as a reader, was not interested in fame or money. He was just trying to figure out why one of his favorite authors was writing under a pseudonym. And the reason that author was writing under a pseudonym is something that we've all, in my opinion, we've all experienced at some point. There is the idea of imposter syndrome. When you are in a room with a lot of other people, you will wonder, am I supposed to be here? Do I belong? Neil Gaiman tells a story about when he was at a Kennedy Center's honors thing, and he's standing next to a gentleman, and the gentleman looks around and says, look at all these amazing people. I don't even think I belong here. And the guy that's talking to him is Neil Armstrong, who was the only person the first person to step foot on the moon.
Right.
And has been a really important historical figure overall for more than just stepping on the moon. But he's looking around and saying, these are artists and writers, and I don't think I deserve to be here. So in the early 80s and the late 70s, if you were a very popular author, the thinking at the time was that you should not release more than one book a year. Mm-hmm. Because if you did so, then people would get tired of you. But some authors, when they write. So sometimes you have all these other stories that you want to tell, and you can't because you're told by your publishing company that they can only release one of your books a year. So you've got all this other stuff on the shelf. And also you've got stuff on the shelf that may not be the style that you've written before, but you still want people to be able to read.
Right.
So this author decided, I'm going to work in secret with my literary agent and a different publishing company and release books that I've written under a pseudonym. And so the author decided, oh, hey, I'll take Robert, because one of my favorite authors also had a pseudonym, and his first name was Robert. And evidently, this author loved the band Bachman Turner Overdrive, and so took Bachman from the band's name and released these books that he'd written. And some of them were a little bit different style than he had released before. But underneath this pseudonym, he released Rage in 1977, The Long Walk in 1979, Roadwork in 1981, The Running Man in 1982, and Thinner in 1984. And Thinner is the book that Steve Brown couldn't escape. He was like, this is the book. This is written by one of my favorite authors, Stephen King, but it's under the pseudonym of Robert Bachman.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen King hid the idea that he was writing under a pseudonym from his own publishing company. He did not want them to get mad because these books were technically probably something they could have released, like they could have sat on for a year and released one a year. And he's like, no, I want to know, am I successful because the books are good, or am I successful because I was successful? And
Right.
people will buy the next Stephen King book. So by this point, he had already written some of his most well-known stuff. I mean, you've got Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining. He was just about to release The Stand. But it was like, there's a very big sort of stylistic similarity with a lot of those books. Whereas Rage, The Long Walk, Roadwork, Running Man was a futuristic book. I mean, it was a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And Thinner was an entirely different type of horror. So he was like, no one's going to let me release these as Stephen King's books. But if you think about Thinner, which is one of his more, well-known works, the next Robert Bachman book, the book that was about to come out when Steve Brown reached out with his letter, was and I might be misremembering here, but the only Stephen King adaptation that has won an Oscar for acting or directing or Best Picture was Misery. Mm-hmm. And Misery was meant to be a Robert Bachman book.
Oh.
He was not going to release Misery under the Stephen King name because he wasn't sure how it would play. So and this goes back to sort of the thing that I thought about while I went second this time. There is a very weird human dichotomy that is, we are super interested in the macabre, the mysteries, the murders, the supernatural. And I've read almost every Stephen King book. Mm-hmm. Under the Dome is highly underrated, and I think probably something that we should be reading right now as we are learning about quarantine and how people react. The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon is a story about a girl lost in the woods listening to a baseball game, and somehow her memories and love for the Boston Red Sox closer helps her get out of the woods where a metaphysical beast is trying to kill her. The Colorado Kid is simply a story about a story. The man writes amazing stuff, but it's often very dark. But when I read it, and it's very different for me, I don't do well with the movies because visually horror and suspense is harder for me to absorb than in reading, because I think when I read, I control the narrative in my brain, which is a very fine line. But as it was, interesting's not the word and galling's not the word, but something between galling and interesting, where when you are telling the story of this real life monster, this person who has killed between estimated 50 and 130, the pit of my stomach went dark. I felt sick. And yet I've read and absorbed all of these stories of fictional characters. And while they will give me bad dreams or make me uncomfortable, there is nothing that is as upsetting as hearing about the things that have happened in reality. And I think that's a very interesting and confusing point of being a fan of fiction, is that there are things that we will read about that if they're fiction, we can absorb. But when they're reality, it's unconscionable.
Well, that's the expression. Truth is stranger than fiction.
And it's way worse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Stephen King has written books about the end of the world, about goblins on the side of airplanes. The Langoliers is so good. Yeah. About a demon that comes in clown form and devours children.
I refuse to watch it.
Oh, no. Reading it, I've read it several times. I will not watch the movie. The visuals I cannot do. But somehow that is not as galling as hearing someone who got away with so many vile acts. So while that is an entire aside, one of the things that I really love about Stephen King is he is an amazing follow on on Twitter. He is very witty at all times, and if you have the chance, I highly recommend you follow him. He has a corgi, which he calls the Thing of Evil, which is hilarious because it's always very tongue in cheek. It's like the Thing of Evil is sleeping all day, or the Thing of Evil barked at squirrels for 3 hours, and having realize that they are not going to listen, decided to nap. But to me, as someone who strives to create things, whether it is this podcast or trying to write, or, I wrote some really bad poetry in high school. And every time I've gone through a breakup, I at least have a book of sonnets that I've tried to write. It is comforting and interesting to know that somebody as successful and as famous as Stephen King went to the lengths of creating an entire pseudonym, hiding it from his own publisher, and publishing some books that are now, to this day, widely known as his works, because he was so interested in finding out, does my writing sell because it's good, or is it because my name is Stephen King?
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody that successful can have that impulsive imposter syndrome, then the next time I have it, it doesn't feel quite so bad.
Interesting.
And of course, Stephen King, being the brilliant mind that he is, he actually then wrote a book later. So he claimed that the pseudonym died by the cancer of pseudonism. And then even in 1996, so we're talking 12 years after the pseudonym died, he still released another book under the pseudonym, saying that the wife of the character, because he crafted an entire character. Bachman was a dairy farmer in New Hampshire who wrote his books only at night. He lived with his wife, Claudia, who mourned their son who had died in a young age at an accident. He went under surgery for a brain tumor, so he couldn't do interviews. That part was kind of brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
And he also he used his agent's insurance broker for the picture on his dust jackets. And then they released another book in 1996 that was found in the attic by his wife. And then again in 2007, there was another book found in the attic by his wife. So he's still using this pseudonym as a way to try out new stories for the next 20 years. And then he wrote a book called The Dark Half, where the author's malicious alter ego comes to life, and the entire book is about them battling, which is just him working through, I created this alter ego and then it came back to bite me, which is journaling in a really, really fictional sense, but kind of brilliant how he worked through that by turning it into another book that he could sell.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting that Stephen King also writes children's books.
Yeah. He is a very, very talented writer. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if anyone who is listening to this has not read The Colorado Kid, you may have seen a series on Sci-Fi in the early 2000s called Haven. Mm-hmm. That entire series is based off of The Colorado Kid. It is a sci-fi book. It is a mystery, and the story then launched an entire, I think they were on for 6 or 7 seasons. And it's a really fun sort of mystery, sort of supernatural stuff, but also kind of crime-esque. But that all came from a 100, maybe 120-page novel that he donated to a company called Hard Case Crime, which was trying to relaunch dime store pulp fiction novels. It was a dark, stormy night when she walked into my office. I was wearing a fedora. I hadn't eaten in 3 days, but I smoked. Yeah, that sort of thing. And he was he helped them launch the entire thing. And I subscribed, and every month for $7.99 for 3 years, I got a new sort of, private detective crime case. It was, pulp fiction sort of novel that was super easy to read, and I could burn through on the subway when I was on my way to work in Boston. And it was arguably, it was the reason that I started reading Stephen King. I'd never read Stephen King until he writes a crime novel, which really isn't even a crime novel. It's just about two people telling. So it's basically like a podcast without a podcast. Because the entire story is these two gentlemen who are the guys who run the newspaper in town telling the story of a long ago unsolved murder to a new person in town. So it's basically a true crime, but fiction style podcast in the form of a book. But it's a story about a story. And you don't even get really a lot of answers about the story other than about the people telling the story. And that blew my mind away, as you could create this mystery and tell this story and really have it not give you the answers you want other than the story being told. That's a really convoluted way to say it. But if you like true crime, go read The Colorado Kid. It's the best way I can do that.
All right. So is that the A side?
That's the A side. Yeah. I mean,
all right.
I could go on for a long time about Stephen King. Also, like, the entire Simpsons movie is basically just Under the Dome, but in a cartoon movie. So that's weird.
All right. Before we go today, I've got to remind everybody, election is just days away, just over a month away. If you're not registered or if you need help getting registered to vote, you can do that on our website. We've got a link there that will let you know if you are registered or if you need help getting registered. It will help you out. Also, you have until October 5th to get a mail-in ballot. Make sure if you do get a mail-in ballot that it has 2 envelopes. There's a smaller envelope, the secret envelope, and then the big envelope. Make sure that it has your 2 envelopes. If you see anything that looks suspicious, fraudulent, freaky about this election, you can log on to 866ourvote.com, or you can actually call 866-OUR-VOTE. It's a completely third-party, nonpartisan group that is dedicated to making sure that this election goes off without a hitch and goes off legally. So those are some.
I mean, I got my mail-in ballot earlier this week, and I am still in the process of moving, so I will complete my mail-in ballot before I legally change my address, because I am still legally at the other place, which we're still trying to sell. So I think that is kosher. But yeah, it is different than I expected. I've never done mail-in voting before, but I was like, okay, I want to. Hopefully, I have applied. We'll see. I have volunteered to be an election judge in my county for the election.
A judge?
So I wanted to be able. Yeah.
You want to be a judge?
So like to be there. To be. Well, they call them election judges, but it's just the person who's at the polling place who's like, hey, what's your name? Sign here. Here's your ballot. Like, this is how you do it. Like, they sit there all day, and it can be like a 13 to 14-hour shift. But in a lot of places in the country, at least here in Minnesota, there's a lot of concern because historically, a lot of people that have worked as election judges or people at the polling places, volunteers, tend to be retirees. But with the current pandemic, there is concern that a lot of polling places will be understaffed. And if they're understaffed, they might get closed. So if you are someone who feels healthy and feels like they are able to take the risk of being out and being part of it, most likely, if your state is anything like mine, there is a need for election judges, poll workers, people at the polls to kind of help make sure that everybody can vote as they want to do so. So if you are able and willing, I highly encourage it. And check in with your county or state as if that is an option for you. But I got a absentee ballot this year because I'm going to mail it in. So the day of the polls, I can be there helping other people to vote.
All right. Again, thank you to everyone that has joined on. If you're brand new with us, thank you so much. We've mentioned before, we've got T-shirts. Just got some T-shirts in the mail, Desktop Detective and one of our logo T-shirts. Man, they look awesome. I'm so excited about those. You can check those out on our website. You can also look at pictures on our Instagram, on our Facebook. You can always email us. It's A-Side, B-Side Podcasts with an S at gmail.com. You can leave us a voicemail on Anchor. You can private message us or DM us on Instagram, on Facebook. You can comment. We always reply. I know I get so kind of discouraged when I comment to people and they don't comment back. So always within at least 24 hours. Sometimes it's hard to see the comments on Facebook because the algorithms are weird, but we'll always reply, and you can email us. You can leave us a voicemail, and we just want to say thank you so much. And this is always a pleasure. And all right, Adam, there it is. That's A-Side, B-Side. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the A-Side, B-Side podcast. If you enjoyed it, please give us 5 stars on Apple and join us again next Friday.